What's up everybody, it's Unknown Facts, and today we're diving deep into the world of gangsters, crime, and historical myths. We're talking about the one and only Al Capone. This dude is legendary, but there's a ton of stuff you probably think you know about him that's totally bogus. We're talking 10 lies you were told about Al Capone. From his supposed Robin Hood image to how he actually went down, we're setting the record straight. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so first up, let's talk about this whole Robin Hood thing. The idea that Al Capone was out there stealing from the rich and giving back to the poor? Yeah, that's a big fat lie. This myth probably started because, during the Prohibition era, Capone would sometimes give away free soup kitchens or hand out cash after a big score. Capone was a master manipulator. He knew how to work the press and make himself look good. Those acts of charity were just a way to distract from the brutal violence and corruption his gang was involved in. He wasn't exactly Mother Teresa, he was a ruthless criminal who used violence and intimidation to get what he wanted. Don't let the soup kitchens fool you. Capone was in it for himself, plain and simple. Now let's talk about the St. Valentines Day Massacre. 7 guys gunned down in broad daylight. Everyone just assumes Capone was behind it. The massacre was brutal, it targeted a rival gang, and Capone definitely had a motive. But the truth is, there's no hard evidence linking him directly to the crime. Some historians believe it was actually Bugs Moran, the leader of the rival gang, who ordered the hit, and that Capone was just being framed. If you were trying to take down your biggest competitor, wouldn't you want to make it look like he did it? Plus, Capone had an alibi. He was in Florida at the time of the massacre, chilling with his boys. Maybe he had some of his goons handle it while he was gone, but even then the style of the killings didn't really match Capone's usual MO. He preferred bombings and drive-bys, not this whole line-em-up-against-the-wall execution style. So while Capone was definitely capable of ordering a hit like that, the evidence just isn't there to say for sure that he did. Okay, so we've all heard the stories, right? Al Capone, the criminal mastermind, the guy who outsmarted the cops and built a billion-dollar empire. Sounds pretty impressive, right? But here's the thing. A lot of that is just Hollywood hype. Sure, Capone was no dummy, he knew how to make money and he wasn't afraid to use violence to get his way. But a lot of his success came down to being in the right place at the right time. Prohibition was a goldmine for gangsters, and Capone was smart enough to capitalize on it. But he wasn't some kind of strategic genius, he was just a ruthless businessman who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The truth is, Capone's empire was built on a foundation of violence, corruption, and a whole lot of luck. Chapter 4. The Death of a Gangster. How Al Capone really died. Alright, so this one might come as a surprise to some of you, but Al Capone did not die in prison. Capone was actually released from prison in 1939 after serving 7 years of an 11-year sentence for tax evasion. He was only 40 years old, but years of hard living and syphilis had taken a toll on his health. By the time he got out of prison, the disease had progressed to the point where he was suffering from dementia and other serious health problems. He spent the last few years of his life living quietly with his family in Florida. He died in 1947, at the age of 48, from a heart attack brought on by complications from syphilis. So, while Capone's life was definitely cut short, he didn't die in some dramatic prison showdown like you see in the movies. Chapter 5. From Rags to Riches. The truth about Capone's upbringing. Okay, so another myth about Capone is that he was born into poverty and that crime was his only way out. But the truth is, Capone's family wasn't exactly struggling. His parents were Italian immigrants, that part's true, but they were actually pretty successful. His dad was a barber and his mom was a seamstress. They lived in a decent neighborhood in Brooklyn, and Capone had a relatively comfortable upbringing. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth or anything, but he wasn't exactly living in squalor either. He had food on the table, clothes on his back, and a roof over his head. Capone was always a bit of a wild child. He was expelled from school for hitting a teacher, and he started hanging out with the wrong crowd at a young age. He made a choice to embrace a life of crime, and he had to live with the consequences. Chapter 6. From Brooklyn to the Windy City, How Capone Conquered Chicago. Alright, so everyone knows Al Capone as a Chicago gangster, right? I mean, the guy's practically synonymous with the Windy City. But here's a little known fact. Capone wasn't actually from Chicago. He was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. So how did he end up running the Chicago outfit? Well, it's all thanks to another notorious gangster, Johnny Torrio. Torrio was a big shot in Chicago, and he needed some muscle to help him run his operation. He called up his old pal Capone, who was making a name for himself in New York, and offered him a job he couldn't refuse. Capone packed his bags and headed west, and the rest, as they say, is history. Alright, so we've talked about how Capone wasn't born into poverty and how he ended up in Chicago, but what about his early days as a criminal? Was he always destined to be a ruthless gangster? Or was there a different path he could have taken? As a kid, Capone was actually a pretty good student. He excelled in certain subjects and even considered becoming a teacher at one point, but his temper and rebellious streak often got him into trouble. He dropped out of school after hitting a teacher, and he started hanging out with a rough crowd in his Brooklyn neighborhood. He bounced around from job to job, working as a bouncer, a paper cutter, even a bowling alley pin setter. But none of these jobs suited him. He craved excitement and power, and he found it in the world of organized crime. By his early 20s, he was already a seasoned criminal, well on his way to becoming the notorious Al Capone we know today. Chapter 8. Busted, how the feds finally nailed Al Capone. Alright, so we've all heard the stories about how Al Capone was untouchable, right? How he had the cops on his payroll and how he could get away with anything. And yeah, for a while there, it seemed like nothing could stop him. But even the most powerful gangsters can't outrun the law forever. In the end, it wasn't Tommy guns or car bombs that brought Capone down. It was something far more mundane: taxes. The feds couldn't get him on murder, racketeering, or any of his other countless crimes, but they nailed him on tax evasion. Capone loved flaunting his wealth and throwing lavish parties, but he wasn't so keen on paying his taxes. The IRS, led by the relentless Elliot Ness and his team of untouchables, had been building a case against Capone for years. They meticulously tracked his income, his spending, everything, and in 1931 they finally had enough to indict him on 22 counts of tax evasion. Chapter 9. The Fall of an Empire. How Capone's world crumbled. Okay, so we've talked about how Capone's empire was built on violence, corruption, and a whole lot of luck. But what about its downfall? How did this seemingly invincible gangster go from the top of the world to a prison cell? First, there was the whole public enemy #1 thing. Capone loved the limelight, he craved attention. But as Capone's crimes became more brazen and violent, public opinion started to turn against him. The St. Valentines Day Massacre, whether he was behind it or not, tarnished his image. People started to see him for what he really was, a dangerous criminal who needed to be stopped. Then there was the pressure from law enforcement. The feds were relentless in their pursuit of Capone. They raided his speakeasies, busted up his gambling rings, and put the squeeze on his associates. And of course, we can't forget about the whole tax evasion thing. Once he was convicted, his empire crumbled. Chapter 10. Beyond the Scarface. Was Al Capone really a cold-blooded killer? Alright, so we've talked about Al Capone the gangster, the businessman, the public enemy. But what about Al Capone the man? Was he really the cold-blooded killer everyone made him out to be? Or was there more to him than met the eye? Capone was a complex figure. He was capable of great violence and cruelty, but he was also known for his generosity and his love for his family. He was a devoted husband and father, and he often went out of his way to help those in need. There are stories of Capone paying for a child's surgery, giving money to struggling families, and even offering jobs to people who were down on their luck. Now, some might say these were just PR stunts, ways for Capone to bolster his public image, but there's also evidence to suggest that Capone genuinely cared about certain people and causes. So, was Al Capone a cold-blooded killer? Without a doubt, he was responsible for countless acts of violence. But he was also a human being, with all the complexities and contradictions that come with it. Outwrote the real Al Capone more than just a gangster. So, there you have it guys. 10 lies you were told about Al Capone debunked. Hopefully, you learned a thing or two about this notorious gangster and realized that the truth is often stranger than fiction. Capone was a complex and contradictory figure, a ruthless criminal who was also capable of compassion and generosity. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more deep dives into the lives of history's most fascinating figures, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to let me know in the comments who you want us to cover next. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.